Hello and welcome to Week 2 of the 2014 NFL and Fantasy Football season. We are back with another exciting fantasy league this year entitled We All Freeze and Die. We all
freeze and die.
And with it comes the return of the Fantasy Danger Zone podcast. I'm joined here today by I'm very excited to welcome our co-host, Mr. Derek Kaczynski, who is the manager of the allegedly back-to-back champion Size 10 Chaos, although I can't find that name in the history of the league, so we'll have to look at that. Anyway, he owns a team here.
I do own a team.
He owns a team that just won this past week, I believe, against our high-scoring team from Week 1. We'll get into that in a minute. Which will be in the recap of the Week 2 games. In addition, we're going to take a look at the 2-0 and 0-2 teams in the league, and a sleeper 1-1 team that we think is one of the strongest. We'll talk about some of the best and worst picks in the draft and free agent pickups. We have possibly a brief discussion about morality and human ownership in fantasy football. And then we'll end up with a preview of Week 3. So let's get started. Derek, what do you have for the featured game of Week 2?
All right. Well, as you put out on the email, the featured matchup of Week 2 was Size 10 Chaos, defending league champion, back-to-back, versus Pound in the Pence, league stalwart, and previous high scorer from Week 1. So
this was
a lot of interesting things happening in this game. A lot of lead changes going back and forth. But really, what this all comes down to, in my opinion, is the bold decision by Size 10 Chaos to start Phillip Rivers against the Seattle defense.
That was indeed a bold decision. However, it almost didn't happen, I'm told.
Yes, that is correct. So in a stunning display of sportsmanship, Mark actually texted me about 10:30 in the morning because I was oversleeping to tell me that Carson Palmer, whom I had originally had in my lineup, was going to be out for the game, and that I needed to switch that over to avoid a 0.
So you had already put Palmer in your lineup the week before, following his good Week 1 performance.
Right.
And had it not been for Mark's act of sportsmanship and valor, Palmer would have been in your lineup with Rivers on the bench. Would that have changed the outcome of the matchup?
Well, Rivers got 31 points in the game. The margin of victory was roughly 25 points, so yes. That was the, I won't say sole reason, but large reason as to why Mark was defeated this week. He did it to himself.
And that's why it really hurts. And yet, I think had Mark withheld this information from you in an attempt to win only by you getting a 0 from your quarterback, I think that probably the fantasy gods would have frowned upon that, and it would have come back to get him in the end.
I can only hope so. I mean, I had a lot of challenges this week. Adrian Peterson, of course, was deactivated from the game, which we'll discuss more later. Jamal Charles was injured early in his game, only got a 1.2 points. So, minus my 2 best players, I was down in a big hole. So, a lot of things did go wrong for me. A lot of things could have gone even more wrong. So who knows what may have changed that had Mark tempted fate with a less than sporting decision prior to game.
Yeah. So I think this could be, despite the fact that it sets him back a game in the standings, maybe this will finally turn around Mark's luck with the fantasy football gods. But I wouldn't count on it. Let's go ahead and look at two other key matchups from Week 2. There were two extremely close games in Week 2, the closest of which was...
You want to start with the second closest,
Okay, yeah.
second closest for last?
Yeah, so what was the second closest match of the week?
That was Kikasaro with 91.9 points over Master of Quack Fu with 89.94 points.
So just under 2-point margin. Yeah, I was looking at this. This was actually B-Love's second consecutive week of losing by less than 2 points. So he is really a 2-point swing each week away from being 2-0.
Right.
But perhaps,
and honestly, it could have gone much worse for him. Of course, Brandon Marshall was a surprise addition to the Sunday night game. He was sitting on the bench along with his 22 points.
This is on Kick-Ass-Roll's bench?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't really fault Kick-Ass-Roll for that decision. It was a Sunday night game. Marshall was expecting to miss. So if she had played him, it would have been a big, big gamble.
Yeah, definitely. A couple of moves that B-Love did make, though. However, he started the Miami defense against the Buffalo Bills, who we thought going into this season would be an offense to attack. But they've actually done pretty well through 2 games. And Miami had, was it 1 point or 0 points?
-1, actually.
Okay, -1 point. So he could have picked up 1 point just by starting no defense. But he also could have started his other defense on the bench, which was the Bears.
13 points, I believe.
Yeah, I think it was 13. Yeah, they were. He benched them because they were playing the stronger team in San Francisco. However, Kaepernick and his 4 turnovers provided a rich bounty of points to the Bears defense that he could have used.
Yeah, that's really the only decision I see that would have been reasonable prior to game.
He could have won by benching Vincent Jackson or Lamar Miller for Ruben Randall, but given that Randall had something like 0.1 points in the first game, that's totally understandable.
Yeah, being a number 2 or possibly number 3 receiver on a fickle offensive team, that's...
To be kind.
Right. That's not something that you can count on every week, so that's hardly a decision I would fault him for. Other than that, I can't see anything in his lineup that would have made a difference. Yeah,
so just a little bad luck 2 weeks in a row. Maybe things will turn around for B-Love in future weeks. Do you want to move on to the closest matchup of the week and the closest of the season, and perhaps in many seasons?
Yes. Why don't you go ahead and lead that out?
This matchup was between the Valerian Steelers and Rooster Illusion. Both teams came into the game 1-0, looking to move 2-0. And this was about the closest we've ever had. The Steelers ended up winning by 0.16 points. Good clutch performance by the Steelers there.
Right.
And I looked at some moves. Fitch had more different options he could have done with his lineup to get a couple more points and win. He benched Trent Richardson, which is, judging by the past year plus of his career, not a bad move. However, Richardson outscored both Jacksons, Steven and Fred, by larger than the margin of victory.
Right.
He also, I think the player that really let him down was Pierre Garçon. It possibly is just that Garçon had a really good chemistry with RG3, who went down with an injury, but he didn't seem to see the ball very much.
It's not as though Cousins was playing poorly after coming in relief, just for whatever reasons Garçon and him weren't able to connect for anything more than the 12 yards.
Yeah, Cousins had a good game, and the Washington professional football team, in fact, scored 41 points. So it must be tremendously disappointing to Coach Fitch to get only 1.2 out of Garçon. If he had started Anquan Bolden or rookie Jordan Matthews over Garçon, that would have been enough to win.
Right. At the same time, though, it's not as though Valerian Steelers didn't give him opportunities for this victory. Malcolm Floyd only had 1.9 points. Greg Jennings had less than half a point. Malcolm Floyd, did I say? Oh.
Yeah, I believe it's
Malcolm.
Malcolm.
Switched to the wrong game.
Wait, or was it Michael Floyd?
M. Floyd Played for
And played in Arizona or San Diego?
Arizona.
Oh, that would be Michael Floyd.
All right, Michael Floyd had less than 2 points. Greg Jennings still had the .4. And then on his bench, if my app will stay on the right page, multiple people with double-digit scoring, including Sammy Watkins, Jay Hill. I actually don't know who that is. And then the other two are quarterbacks. So
Jeremy Hill, the Bengals running back.
Yeah, Jeremy Hill, and then Jonathan Stewart also had 11 points.
So this game could have not been nearly so close if Valerian Steelers had made a couple of moves that were sort of toss-ups amongst who should start anyway.
Right.
Okay, so I think that moves us on to talk about some of the teams as a whole. We have 3 teams who have all started 2-0, including the Valerian Steelers, along with Pelvic Sorcery and Purple Rain. Now, what do you see when you look at these teams? Are these teams for real?
That's tough to say early in the season, but looking at the lineups, looking at the rosters, I think that the one who is closest to being real is going to be Pelvic Sorcery.
All right, we'll take closest to being for real as a compliment here.
I'm looking at their lineup. Not many holes. Planning for some future expansion, and overall, top to bottom, pretty solid-looking team anchored by Cam Newton, some exciting players at wide receiver, Patterson, Nelson, Wes Welker when he comes back from suspension, some very solid running backs. I would say possibly the second best running back stable in the league with Gio Bernard and LaShawn McCoy. And then apparently 2009 era Antonio Gates coming in.
How about Antonio Gates? I think that is the clear free agent pickup of the week.
Yes, absolutely.
I only added him to my roster because Jordan Reed, my tight end starter, got hurt week 1, and Ladarius Green, my backup, hadn't really gotten much action in week 1. So I said I need a new tight end. I looked at who was available, and lo and behold, sitting there is statistically the second greatest tight end of all time, Antonio Gates.
Right. So going back to your compatriots at 2-0, Purple Rain.
Yeah. So you see some holes to her roster. What should she focus on to improve her team, do you think?
Definitely the wide receivers position. I believe her most prominent receiver is Golden Tate, whose biggest thing going for him is that Megatron is always going to get double covered.
Okay, so you should see some single coverage across field. Plus, we also know that Matthew Stafford, Fatty Matty, as someone called him, was that you?
He's going to throw it 9,000 times this season.
Yeah. Yeah.
So volume is going to be there, but as a number 1 receiver, a little something to be desired, and then her second and third, not really worth mentioning. Running back could be an issue with Ryan Matthews being injured yet again.
Oh, who saw that coming? You had week 2 in your Ryan Matthews injury poll. I think you can collect your money here.
She still has Matt Forte and C.J. Spiller, which is going to be solid, but with that flex position being open, especially with her weakness at wide receiver, that injury is definitely going to hurt her. Although she does make that up a little bit with Jimmy Graham at the tight end.
Jimmy Graham will mask a lot of shortcomings in the team.
Right.
Plus, I also think, despite being down Matthews, Forte and Spiller make a pretty good running back tandem here.
And then, as we'll talk more about later, not very impressed with Valerian Steelers despite his 2-0 start. Again, wide receivers are going to be the bane of his existence with Michael Floyd, apparently. Greg Jennings, and Kendall Wright as his three starters. Although he does have Jeremy Maclin as the flex to beef that up a
Yeah,
little
I think
bit. Those are three names that you're going to be very excited about.
I see some potential for growth among those. I think Michael Floyd has been a trendy sleeper, and he did very well week 1. But it was week 2 when he had to deal with Drew Stanton throwing the ball instead of Carson Palmer that his production really dropped off. So if Palmer comes back, he could do well. Kendall Wright is kind of an enigma. He had one of the quietest 90-catch seasons I can remember last year. But I think the issue with him is the touchdowns. He's going to get 80 to 90 catches and very possibly over 1,000 yards, but he seems to top out at about 3 or 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, well, obviously, I think the biggest thing against him is Jake Locker throws the ball to him.
I don't think it's that bad a thing. I think
the quarterback makes the receiver.
Yeah.
He has some things on his bench he could do. I think Sammy Watkins would be a good addition to his starting lineup, especially if Buffalo can continue their current offensive windfall.
Yeah, possibly in place of Jennings.
Mm-hmm.
Or a lot of these, as you're saying, the quarterback makes receivers. A lot of these guys have pretty up-in-the-air situations, right? Jennings is stuck with Matt Castle, who looked terrible, but maybe Bridgewater takes over at some point. Michael Floyd, like I said, had to deal with Drew Stanton instead of Palmer.
Mm-hmm. And then even Watkins has E.J. Manuel, very unproven as of yet. However, seems to have made a lot of progress since the beginning of the regular season. I know that when the Bills brought in Kyle Orton, Senior Neckbeard, people had, including myself, were signaling that as the end of the E.J. Manuel era. I don't think that many people other than myself are still predicting that. But then again, I am a self-confessed hater, and I am gonna hate.
As haters will do.
Right.
Okay, I did notice there was one glaring weakness on Pelvic Sorcery, and that was the position that got 0 points in week 2. Did you take notice of this?
Oh, is that your kicker?
Yeah. So as I was telling you in the car the other day, I had this idea for a fantasy league where, in addition to all the regular scores, I think we should roll 2 6-sided dice, get a number from 2 to 12, and just add that on to people's scores.
It is not the same thing.
That's the same thing as using kickers.
It is entirely separate things. If you're going to do it with kickers, you might as well do it with wide receivers.
Wide receiver, the talent of a wide receiver plays a much larger role in how many points they score.
Tell that to Marcus Colston.
Well, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on the utility of kickers. But regardless, I think my hatred of kickers...
Or as my personal hero and mentor, Charles Barkley, would say, you're just wrong.
I may, in fact, be wrong. And I think my wrongness and hubris about the position bit me a little bit this week when I decided I was going to change kickers on all of my teams just because there was no difference between kickers. So I literally went through my teams on each one, rolled a 10-sided die. Well, actually, it was a 20-sided die, but I only used the numbers 1 through 10.
Right.
And selected that kicker. So in one league, I picked up Cody Parkey from the Eagles, who did fine yesterday. Another one, I picked up Mike Nugent, who had, I think, 6 points, but also missed 3 other kicks. And in this league, I picked up someone named Coons, who didn't even kick for the Titans. He was apparently on the roster, then was replaced by Ryan Suckup. And I had to take this 0 from the kicker position.
It's almost as though skill at the kicker position might actually matter.
It matters insofar as it gets you on a team or not, I think. T. Coons. Last year, the best fantasy kicker through 14 weeks was Justin Tucker. He had upwards of 20 points one week. Then he went out in the fantasy playoffs and it snowed in Detroit, or was it? No, Detroit's the dome. I guess it was in Baltimore, and he put up a 0 points from the number one kicker.
Similar thing happened. Another position, one might say more important of a position. There is a certain player who spent most of the season on the waiver wire, had one great week late in the season, got picked up, and did middling to okay throughout the fantasy playoffs until he scored 40 points during the championship game. Would you like to take a guess as to whom that player is?
Does he share a genetic characteristic with Conan O'Brien?
I would say yes.
This would be the bane of my fantasy existence, the Red Rifle Andy Dalton, would it not?
And is he a kicker, just to refresh my memory?
He plays quarterback.
So would you suggest rolling 2d6 to pick one's quarterback every week?
Well, no, clearly that's 4d6 for the quarterback.
That does sound more reasonable.
Point taken on that. I think the lesson here, I'm not sure that disproves my point about kickers, but maybe it reproves the idea that all of this is random and meaningless.
Yeah, the point is, kickers are no more susceptible to that phenomena than any other position.
Okay, kickers are people too. Okay, speaking of people too, maybe they should move on to our
sleeper team.
Yeah, let's do that first. So you were telling me you looked over the teams. You saw one team at 1-1 that looked exceptionally strong to you. You think they're a definite championship contender. Would you like to illuminate us on who that is?
Sure. That is going to be new addition to the league, Keith Redwine, owner-coach of Get Gronked.
Get Gronked. Okay, tell us about Get Gronked.
He's fairly strong top to bottom, going with Brady at the quarterback position, conservative yet reliable choice. Receivers are strong with Randall Cobb, Ashton Jeffrey, and then DeMarco Murray as his top running back has been. As a Dallas fan, I'm going to try to avoid getting my hopes up. That's when Jared Jones loves to strike. But Murray has been sensational this season thus far. The Cowboys have beefed up their line. They said preseason that committing to the running game was going to be a priority for them, and through 2 weeks they have. They have followed up on that. I think Murray is going to have a big season this year, and then Ahmad Bradshaw and Alfred Morris could be very, very strong secondary backs. Bradshaw, of course, splitting time in Indy, but as just about any back would be, appears to be a little more explosive with a little more big play potential than Trent Richardson. And then depending on what the quarterback situation is for the Washington professional football team, Morris could very likely see a much increased workload, loving his running backs. And then if Gronk can stay on the field, the team's namesake, we know what he's capable of, what he's going to do. Very strong team. I think that they could be a top contender down the stretch.
Yeah, both of their defenses have looked very, very good so far too. New England with their huge performance with all the takeaways and touchdowns in week 2, and the Bengals look like one of the best real life defenses. And we'll see if that translates to them scoring a lot of fantasy points. So I think, I agree. He has a lot of depth. I think Brady either will turn things around and get back to the super solid top 8-ish fantasy quarterback we know. Or if not, I think this team has enough depth that they could make a move at that position. Offer up Brady plus some running back depth or something to get a higher ranked quarterback.
And actually, I didn't even go into all of his running back depth with Pierre Thomas and Stephen Ridley sitting on his bench. Not top earners, but definitely something. Definitely guys that you'd like to put in at your flex position. So those could be used as some trade chips to get like a second-tier quarterback that would get most of what Brady would do on a normal year at a very low cost.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we also discussed having a wider panel discussion with a Truman or two on the topic of morality and player ownership. Unfortunately, it looks like both of them are going to bed or otherwise not responding. So we'll just have to wait for their comments via email or possibly next week. But we probably want to wrap this up in 5 minutes or so. But do you have any brief words you want to say on the subject? Or
well, this is mainly a kind of a personal thing for myself, as I have Adrian Peterson,
who this week has been arrested, right, for charges have been brought against him.
He's been indicted, I believe.
Indicted is the word. Okay.
So he is facing child abuse and child neglect charges down in Texas. Obviously, I invested a lot into Peterson at the beginning of the season, and I'm a little unsure of how I should go about it, or even if it matters of how I go about it. It very well mean that obviously nobody outside of our league will even know, and likely nobody inside of the league will care, but
unless people outside see this video, then they'll know.
I think that the odds of that happening are relatively low. Sure. But anyway, the issue is, would it be considered ethical outside of popular or public opinion to endorse a player whose actions, one might justifiably call into question, very similar to the Ray Rice situation that occurred last week. That, of course, was made easy by the league's indefinite suspension and his release from the Ravens. Peterson is going to make me make a choice with the Vikings reactivating him this week. He expects to play on Sunday, and then pending anything like that, do I have a moral obligation to go with what I consider to be the right course of action, or is this all just pretend numbers and nothing actually matters, so who gives a fuck?
Yeah, I think that would be my defense of not feeling morally culpable for the players on your rosters. The whole idea of owning these players in the first place, if you're going to speak of it that way, makes the whole endeavor morally dubious. But I think if you've begun to treat this as just a numbers game, where you're making selections on the computer to get imaginary number points for your imaginary team, I think I can distance that a little bit. When I very first started playing, I tried to go with certain standards for my team. Like, I don't want to own a Raiders player. I don't want to own a Cowboys player. I don't want to own someone who's been convicted of crimes. But I've had Ben Roethlisberger on my team before. I've had Michael Vick on my team. Mm-hmm. I had Ray Rice on one team this year. So even simultaneously, while I was criticizing Roger Goodell in the NFL for not putting down a harsher penalty, I was myself not suspending him from one team that he was on. It was in the auto draft, so I wasn't totally responsible for ending up there.
Right.
But I didn't take action to drop him until the season-long or indefinite suspension came down. So possibly I'm not any better than them. Mm-hmm. No, that's not true. I'm better.
Ha!
Okay, so
you want to move on to the Week 3 matchup before we have to
look at Week 3. So we have two featured matchups for this week. The first one is a matchup of two undefeated teams, Purple Rain versus Valerian Steelers, both of whom we talked about earlier.
Yeah, so this should be fairly quick as we've gone over each team's strengths, each team's weaknesses, and I think that you and I are in agreement that both of these teams are perhaps a bit weaker than their current position in the standings.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I think one real team that struggled a lot more than we expected the first couple of weeks is the New Orleans Saints. But they have a home game against the Vikings, who just got lit up for 30 points with the Patriots. So I think that could be a big turnaround, but that will affect both teams because the Valerian Steelers have Drew Brees and Purple Rain have Jimmy Graham. So
right,
these could exactly counteract each other. Purple Rain right now is a 10-point underdog, but that's with Ryan Matthews still in their lineup. One would assume they're going to move someone else in there. They can move Spiller in at running back and then choose from anyone to play flex. Possibly Cecil Shorts if he's back at wide receiver, or Kenny Stills, or go with the 2 tight end set of Jimmy Graham and Zach Ertz. So they've got some room to make up there. Valerian Steelers have 3 quarterbacks on their team, but one of them is Drew Brees, so there's not really a decision to be made there.
Right.
I think in the end, I think the Steelers have a little bit better balance up and down the roster, so that'll be my pick for this week. Who do you pick for this?
I'm going to go with Purple Rain, actually.
Okay.
I think that the weaknesses at wide receiver will hurt the Steelers more than Purple Rain, and I really can't endorse any team that would voluntarily start Chris Ivory. So I think that with C.J. Spiller and if I can find the right lineup again, stupid app every 15 seconds takes me away. With Matt Forte and C.J. Spiller, I think that's a much stronger running back core. And I think that Matty Ice will bounce back after his poor showing last weekend to feast on a Tampa Bay team who has previously been beaten by Austin Davis and Derek Anderson.
Yeah, that is not a sentence that I thought we would be saying 2 weeks into the season. Okay, well I think I have a little bit more faith in the Steelers receivers than you do. But we'll see how this goes for our head-to-head pick.
And then for our actual game.
Yeah, so that's the game matchup of 2-0 teams. However, we think that's a little bit of a fool's gold matchup. The actual matchup of the week is
Pound of the Pence versus Get Gronked.
Exactly. This is 2 1-1 teams who may be stronger than these 2-0 teams, we think. Pound of the Pence had the high score week 1, Get Gronked had the high score week 2, and now they go head-to-head. In fact, it's projected to be an extremely close match. Yahoo projections have it 112.78 to 112.02 in favor of Get Gronked.
Indeed.
So let's take a look at these teams. Do you have a favorite off the top, or do you need to analyze a little bit more?
No, I think I'm going to go with the Pence on this one. Although I do like Get Gronked as a very strong team, I think that Pound of the Pence is also much stronger than their record would indicate. The Matt Stafford Megatron combo should be potent all year. Good health, of course. And I think that Green Bay has been a little suspect in their secondary.
I would agree.
They could have a big week for that duo, and I think that the rest of his receivers, Julio Jones, Mike Wallace, are in line for big weeks, and then his running backs are a little weaker, but he should be able to overcome that. Get Gronked, however, is very strong at that position.
Yeah, I think that was actually a design point in the draft for Pound of the Pence to de-emphasize running back. Looking at how fragile the position is, he felt like he could get more security of production from top wide receivers, for example. So he went with some really strong wide receivers, Megatron and Julio Jones, but still got some very serviceable running backs in the $10 to $15 range. Rashad Jennings and Shane Vereen both catch a lot of passes, are used in multiple ways, and I think it can be solid number 2 running backs on most teams. And if you have a couple of them, plus stronger at other positions, you can do quite well. I also think Pound the Pence could maybe make some improvement at the position of defense this week. He only has one defense on his team, which is St. Louis, who's playing Dallas, who has looked, well, there were a lot of interceptions week 1 against San Francisco, but last week they looked good. So I don't know if that's a position he will address or not. For me, I think the key here is each of these teams are dominated by a passing duo from a real NFL team.
Right.
And in the case of Pound the Pence, that's Stafford and Megatron, who are at home against Green Bay, who, as you said, have had a pretty shaky-looking defense. Gave up a lot of yards and points to the Jets even last week.
Right.
So I'd expect them to have huge games. And that could be a kind of shootout because Green Bay's offense should put the pressure on them to pass and score a lot.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of the ball, Gronk has several New England Patriots, including Brady and Gronkowski, as well as their defense on his team. Brady's been quiet so far, and I think that will keep up this week because against Oakland, who's looked like one of the, if not the worst teams in the league, I think this could be a game where they don't really have to push on the accelerator too much. So I think they can hold Gronkowski to a relatively low snap count, and not really push for a lot of points. Maybe the Patriots win this game like 24-10 or something like that.
Right, and it could actually play into the Pence's hand with a heavier emphasis on Ridley and Vereen.
Yeah, I mean, you think of Vereen as more the catching back and Ridley as the power runner, but probably they'd both get lots of looks in this game. So I think my pick also will be the Pound and the Pence, but it should be an exciting one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Have anything else to go over here?
No, I think that about covers it.
Any final thoughts? I guess you just answered that. That about covers it. Still mastering this YouTube. Well, I'm going to play our new outro song here. And we welcome comments via email or on this YouTube video itself. If you have any questions for future mailbags or want to appear as a guest, just send me an email or other suggestions for segments, etc. Otherwise, good luck week 3, everyone.
Indeed.
May the best fantasy owners win, and we'll see you soon. I don't know how we need a good sign off for this. We need to have something like
We'll work on that.
We could just both say, hey, Derek.
Yeah.
Danger zone!
Not where I was going with it, but it works.
Oh, okay, where were you going with it?
We all freeze and die.
Let's try to do it in unison, right?
Alright.
We all
Freeze and die.
Alright, we'll work on that.
Yeah.
For now, that's it. See ya.
Bye.